Wonderful. We're coming up on the top of the hour and we are set to go. Welcome everybody to our very first Resilience 360 webinar. My name is Jacob Vandersteen, the founder and chief executive officer of Wealthyer, and we exist as a management consulting company that is focused on securing American enterprises and organizations all over, particularly in the financial services industry and the 16 critical infrastructure industries and more. So today we're going to be talking about a core topic of why we exist, and that is resilience. We believe that enterprises are only as good as they are resilient, as they are able to adapt to change and handle risks and uncertainties that may arise. So the content that we're going to cover today is the pillars of proper preparation in this case. And we have a great presenter. He's the leader of our enterprise resilience practice. His name is Richard Davis, and he has over 25 years of experience as a lawyer with a specialized background in cybersecurity, very unique understanding of the inner workings of not only the financial services sector, but various industries, having dealt with everything from the energy sector, being involved in the Deepwater Horizon litigation. He spearheaded technical litigation support at Cravath and many other organizations, as he does today, and is through and with Wealthyer platform that we're bringing so that we can serve more enterprises. So we are thankful and grateful to have Rich presenting today. Rich, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to you so we can get into some of the content.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jacob. I think you're making me blush. That being said, I'm delighted to be here, everyone, today to talk about Resilience 360, especially as it relates to enterprise resilience and safeguarding the organization. We're going to discuss a number of topics which are all germane and a total of 7 key pillars that are resonating throughout the security world. I'm going to start off by, Jacob already indicated who I was, so I'm not going to belabor that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in, okay? We are in a world that is faced with existential threats, not only at a national level, but at a corporate level, at the corporate enterprise level. And I'm not being dramatic. We have sophisticated ransomware attacks that are ongoing on a daily basis with threat actors that are operating asymmetrically, meaning they're much more agile than most organizations have the ability to deal with. They can pivot on a moment. They can shut down infrastructure in one company, move to a country, and move to another country at the drop of a hat. They are not bound by laws. They are unrestricted. They're currently doing a lot of syndication between various highly specialized criminal groups that specialize in ransomware as a service, that specialize in initial access. Others are specialists in threat intelligence to become aware of that which corporations are doing to be safe. So it's a world that's fraught with all kinds of risk. One of the chief concerns of CISOs and various other executives, particularly boards across the nation, globally in fact, are supply chain weaknesses. Supply chain weaknesses tend to result in more cyber events than events we would normally see, let's say, in a Fortune 1000 enterprise itself. And there are lots and lots of challenges there. We have examples like SolarWinds, where there was essentially a software development lifecycle SDLC process that was breached, which resulted in the distribution of software that had backdoors in it. Then we have regulatory pressure. There's an enormous amount of regulatory pressure with respect to some new regs. We already know that GDPR has a host of requirements that are very challenging to meet when it comes to responding to data subject access requests. Given the way that data is stored in organizations today, both GDPR and CCPA continue to present challenges to organizations. Layer on top of that the 2023 amendments to DFS 500, New York Department of Financial Services, the Reg 500, which mandates, based on how large an organization is, certain requirements around their cyber programs, whether or not they have a CISO, what kind of training they do, what kind of MFA needs to be implemented, what kind of encryption needs to be implemented for data that's being stored, et cetera. Layer on top of that, DORA, right? DORA is the latest European regulation that applies to insurance companies. It also applies to financial institutions. It's much more expansive than DFS 500. And DORA is also a lot more prescriptive. So DORA has lots of mandates for organizations well beyond financial services. In fact, it reaches and concerns and touches all of the major suppliers of critical services to these institutions. Other areas that we need to be deeply concerned about: AI, right? And we need to be concerned about AI both from a regulatory perspective, just from a compliance. Lots of regs are coming down the pike. We have regs in lots of states that are in committee right now as it relates to making sure that organizations have the ability to demonstrate that they are mitigating the potential for bias in their AI. If you're using AI as a company to do marketing, is that AI being selective? Is it redlining various demographic groups? Then there's the other facet of AI. I just described a business use case. And that facet is where threat actors are using AI to automate their attacks. And that this is a nightmare of nightmares, because now the very tool that and capabilities that we've relied on from a business perspective are being used in a malicious way, whether it's for deep fakes, and there's a ton of deep fake legislation that is either in committee or has been passed. And it is extremely important for organizations that are in the media business to understand what the potential implications are for them. But that having been said, the ability of a threat actor to use AI to launch a cyber attack, let's say a denial of service, distributed denial of service, or create a staged attack or mount a campaign, is now facilitated by AI and they're leveraging it very heavily. Incident response, that is another area that's critically important. I used to run a SOC for a Fortune 50 company, and I was responsible for both the incident response teams in three time zones, as well as forensics, vulnerability management, DLP, cyber threat intel, threat hunt. All of those functions are part of incident response in some form or fashion. But traditionally, we're talking about the folks who are actually seeing what's going on, looking at machines being contained, ensuring that artifacts are being preserved whenever there's an incident. They're triaging and classifying incidents and things of that nature. I was recently involved in a ransomware incident. I was actually in Europe at the time, got a phone call at 4 a.m. my EU time. And that particular incident resulted in the complete shutdown of a financial institution in New York City. And that institution did not have an out-of-band communication capability. What that means is if ransomware takes out your environment in its entirety, do you have protocols? Do you have the ability to mount a response? Do you have the ability to respond and recover? Do you have the ability to pull in all the relevant stakeholders? So those areas are areas that we are very much focused on. All of these things that you see listed here. I've got some statistics that we're happy to share with you. We're happy to share the presentation later on once this webinar is over. But these are some very interesting statistics. Obviously, the 2024 is not complete yet, and 2025 isn't here yet. But those are projections that you see in the various charts. You have annual ransomware claims on the rise. You have cyber attacks on insurance companies on the rise. Excuse me. And you have third-party vendor risk on the rise. These are all areas that the enterprise resilience practice of Wealthyer focuses on. We bring to bear many years of experience in helping organizations address some of the challenges that you see here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into two of the main regs that have significant implications for financial institutions and insurance companies. As I mentioned earlier, I talked a little bit about DFS 500. DFS 500 is one of many regs that have significant cyber and privacy obligations for different organizations. DFS 500, which was revamped in, I believe it was June of last year, to amend the existing reg, which was in place since 2017, imposing certain cyber reporting or posture requirements. And there are three main categories. And I'm going to start here by quickly describing the small business category. As I said earlier, it applies to banks, insurance companies. It doesn't matter where you're domiciled. If you're doing business in New York, you're subject to DFS 500. We've got some exemptions. If you're a smaller business and you have less than 10 employees, including contractors, and less than 5 million in gross revenue, or less than 10 million in year in total assets over 2 fiscal years, you are potentially exempt, right? Just based on the reading of that section, you're exempt. If you're not handling NPI, you will also have the opportunity to indicate to DFS when you file that you're exempt from certain requirements. Captive insurers do not control NPI, and you can see what the theme is here with CND 500.19 CND. It's about non-public information. And I like to say, when I talk about non-public information, I like to talk about non-material non-public information as well as non-public information, which includes PI, PCI, and various other types of data, right? So the key point for smaller businesses that do have some degree of compliance. Now, keep in mind, there's still obligations. You're exempt from certain things, but you are not exempt from certain basic fundamental requirements, right? Such as notifying DFS about cybersecurity events and conducting risk assessments. And I can speak firsthand to these because I am working with companies that fit this bill as it relates to them being small from the DFS perspective. So what's going on here? We've got a couple of upcoming deadlines. And in November of this year, these companies will be required to implement MFA if they haven't done so already. They will also be required to conduct annual cybersecurity training. And that is something that, in my estimate, regardless of what kind of company you are, that's something that you should do, right? And in May 25th of next year, there's another set of requirements that'll kick in. You got to implement enhanced user access controls. And for smaller organizations, this can be challenging, but there are lots of great technologies out there that can facilitate this without breaking the bank. By November next year, there will be full compliance mandated with multi-factor authentication requirements. And then the requirement to implement asset inventory is going to be very important. And this is something that I'm doing for a company that got hit with ransomware, right? We're using various tools to scan the network to build an inventory in a more thorough way than was previously done before. And you'll have an opportunity to quiz me on this a little bit later on in our Q&A section. The next category of companies are some of the larger companies, and their requirements are a little bit more rigorous. As you can see here on the slide, the criteria for these companies, what we call Class A companies, you have to have over 20 million in gross revenue over the last 2 fiscal years, over 2,000 employees, and over 2,000 employees, or 1 billion in gross annual revenue globally in the last 2 years. Class A companies have more stringent requirements. Typically, if they were to be impacted by an event, the impact would be much greater on the consumer population. And if you have a lot of Class A companies that are impacted, then you begin to have national economic implications as it relates to cyber attacks. And the one theme here is resilience, making sure the organization is more resilient, that they have detailed plans, and that the executives put their names on the line, the CISOs, the CFOs, the CIOs, whoever that executive is that signs off, okay? And so, as was the case with smaller companies, there are upcoming deadlines in this November, as well as in 2025, okay? I'm not going to dive deeper than I already have with respect to these regs. I'm going to move on to the next category, and then we're going to touch on DORA, Digital Operation Resilience Act. Okay. Covered entities, non-Class A, non-exempt. There are some entities that don't fit the small exemption requirement that aren't Class A. And so those companies, they also have compliance requirements. And what this is here is just a list of what those requirements are. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into this because we will provide this information to you and we will be available for any questions that you have to the extent you have any. What is important to note here is that these requirements are non-discretionary. Okay. All right. Moving right along. So DORA, right? So this is the EU analog to some extent of New York Department of Financial Services Reg 500. DORA is going to be in effect. It's not in effect yet, right? It's been enacted, but it's not in effect. On January of next year, it will be in effect. And there are some very strict and stringent requirements. Unlike NYDFS 500, DORA applies more broadly to any companies that are in the supply chain, right? Yes, the focus is on banks, investment firms, crypto asset providers, but it goes well beyond that. So if you're an organization that is based here, domiciled in the United States, domiciled in New York or New Jersey or wherever you happen to be domiciled, and you are doing business in the EU, you must, and you fit the bill, you must, and in no uncertain terms, comply with DORA. But here's the good news. To the extent that you are already complying with Class A requirements, it makes it a lot easier for you to comply with DORA requirements. Okay. Banks and insurance companies, investment firms, crypto asset providers, you're all on the hook for compliance with DORA. And you'll see critical third-party ICT service providers. What's ICT? That's information communication technology, right? So any of these providers, such as cloud services providers, whether it's Amazon, Microsoft, Google Cloud, Cisco Cloud, whatever it happens to be, they're on the hook if they're serving any of these institutions. Software providers, you're on the hook as well. So you can see already, based on what I've said previously, that DORA has a much more expansive scope, right? What are the key points here? Key points are that there is focus on the provider ecosystem. There's focus on high-risk financial institutions. In the banking world, we have CCAR, Comprehensive Credit Analysis. I forget exactly what it means. I haven't talked about CCAR in, I don't know, 8 years. But high-risk institutions identified as critical or systemically important may face additional obligations. And what this means is that European regulators have a lot of discretion, right, as it relates to making a determination as to whether or not an organization should be subject to more stringent scrutiny. There is a proportionality application of the reg. And the proportionality, for those who aren't familiar with the use in terms of legal terms, you look at the scenario, you look at the size of in the EU that have significant implications from a privacy perspective, from a cyber perspective. Because of that, DORA is designed specifically to work with other regs, such as GDPR and MiFID II. And the thinking there is that not only is does the EU have its umbrella legislation and regulations, it's each nation state within the EU will also have a set of requirements. And typically those requirements, whether they be localization requirements or any rights that may be granted to their citizens, that's harmonized in the DORA framework. Okay. All right. Again, one of my favorite topics. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some similarities and distinctions between NYDFS 500 and DORA. All right. It's really important when you're an organization that's subject to multiple analogous regulations to understand the distinctions as well as the similarities. That allows for the organization to take appropriate measures to ensure that their posture is harmonized. And what I mean by that is if you have a Venn diagram of requirements, and this is the way that I encourage people to think about these regs, you want to look at the commonality, and then you want to look at the distinctions, and you want to identify what capabilities you have or need to close the gap, right? In the most cost-effective, resource-efficient way, right? Key similarities between DFS and DORA: comprehensive risk management, right? Both programs require risk assessments, third-party risk management. From an incident reporting perspective, the timing, that the notification requirement of a what I call a material event, and that's borrowing from the language from the SEC, the new SEC reporting requirements. If it's a material event or significant cybersecurity event, you have to notify, you have to make notification to the controlling authorities within 72 hours. And obviously that's going to be very difficult if you have lack of information about what's transpired because your infrastructure is taken out, right? Which goes back to one of the earlier comments that I made about having out of band communication and collaboration capabilities in the event and associated playbooks as well in the event that your infrastructure is taken out, right? The technical scope of both of these pieces of legislation include the 7 key areas, right? The cyber threat landscape, it's constantly evolving. There's no stopping it. There's no stopping the agility of the threat actors. And I'm an ex-military guy, so I like to talk in terms of symmetry and asymmetry. What we are in is an asymmetric posture because we have regulations, we have rules, regulatory compliance and legal obligations, right? The regulatory landscape is constantly shifting. There are data localization requirements that are constantly changing on a yearly basis. Chinese regulations, for example, are very stringent on how certain information needs to remain within a particular and cannot depart that geolocation. So you have to come up with novel ways of ensuring that that you're not violating those regulations, but at the same time, you're not applying undue friction to the business. Okay. Third party and supply chain risk management. I've been involved in scenarios where a company has well over 1,000 third party supply. And what the company is trying to do is they're trying to propagate their cyber liability insurance terms and conditions throughout their supply chain. That's a great idea, but it's very challenging. And so you need to make sure that your MSAs and your agreements stipulate the requirements that are placed on you as the prime, as the enterprise, as it relates to reporting, as it relates to being able to audit security posture. And there are lots of ways to do this in a non-disruptive way. And the next is data protection and privacy. You can't protect data if you don't know where it is or what it is. And unstructured data, unlike structured data, presents the largest problem for organizations because unstructured data can reside anywhere, right? It can reside on a laptop, a thumb drive, a cell phone, in chat accounts, et cetera, et cetera. And if you do not have the ability to classify data at scale, there are significant challenges in your ability to respond to GDPR data subject access requests, CCPA data subject access requests, or any other privacy legislation mandated requirement. So being able to leverage certain tools, and I come out of the e-discovery world, having worked at a major law firm for many years, running the technical litigation support department. I've seen the tools evolve to the point where I can take tools from other areas at other price points, from other disciplines, bring them in, apply them in a way that heretofore it's never been done before, right? Incident response and business continuity. I can't emphasize this enough. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you have a MSP and that MSP is storing your backups in the same colo as your production data and production infrastructure, fire them immediately. And I don't say that jokingly. I say it because I'm dealing with a situation now where something like that just had happened. And the insurance company is involved, the lawyers are involved, and and the digital forensics people are involved. There's just a lot of stuff that can be avoided if you make sure your backups are in different availability zones. Employee awareness and training, that's something that every organization should do. There should always be a program that not only creates awareness, but it's done on a regular basis, right? And not only that, it tests. There's an attestation requirement that I would suggest most organizations implement if they haven't done that already, that the employees understand about phishing, and that they are taking appropriate measures to safeguard intellectual property, work product, credentials, and things of that nature. And then the last item here is technology and infrastructure resilience. And today, when we talk about the cloud, we have tons and tons of resilience. We have East availability zones from Microsoft and AWS, West, European, Asian, so many different ways that you can make your data available by moving it around in different places. In the incident that I indicated that I was involved in with a New York City company, the threat actors deleted all the backups because it was real easy to do it. They were able to identify where all the critical backups were, delete them, wipe the logs, right? So we have no IP information as to where, how they came in, et cetera. They just completely wiped everything. So, key distinctions. The key distinctions are regulatory scope. DORA is EU-wide and applies to critical information, communication, technology providers. That's what that ICT acronym stands for. DFS, it's state level, right? But it applies to financial institutions in New York. They don't have to be domiciled in New York. They just need to have a presence in New York. Testing requirements. DORA is much more rigorous when it comes to testing. There is a standard that they have prescribed in their legislation that must be used for penetration testing. It's called threat-led penetration testing. And it's a very specific type of penetration testing that organizations must conduct based on their risk profile. Okay. DFS, less restrictive. Third-party oversight, lots of details there for third-party suppliers. On the DORA side, DFS places that onus on the covered entity, right? And penalties are very strict, very in line with what the GDPR penalties are. Okay, so I'm now taking you to why Resilience 360 is the solution. It is the approach that can be taken to for an organization's security posture. It represents many years of work, many years of research, and the realization that the point solution approach that many organizations take, whether it's when people talked about security for the longest, it was always about endpoint security, network security, perimeter security. But the reality is that security transcends all of those structural. Security has to be a holistic mindset that is instilled in the organization. And the chart that I have here, the visual, represents various stakeholders. It's a very modular approach that we've developed. The CISO has certain responsibilities. The CIO has certain responsibilities and is responsible for certain initiatives, whether they be tactical, operational, or strategic. You've got the privacy officer, you've got the COO. This just represents a snapshot of, let's say, a Fortune 100 company's C-level executives, right? And this highlights just some of the functions that they're responsible for, right? Threat intelligence, making sure that they have the latest information about vulnerabilities, right? And making sure that they have the latest information about threats. We at Wealthyer have the benefit of working with some incredible technologies, one of which was actually presented at a CISA conference just about 3 weeks ago. And from my experience, it is one of the most powerful tools that can facilitate proactive awareness of vulnerabilities by correlating vulnerabilities that literally create a picture of a business process, right? And all of the applications and infrastructure supporting a business process. That's revolutionary. Incident response, we have some really cool technology that's out of band that allows you to, with the push of a button, stand up a virtual infrastructure so that your teams, which cannot access the resources in the enterprise, can get on and collaborate with experts, SMEs, lawyers, insurance companies, whoever, right, to get back to your posture from a respond and recovery perspective. You have a modular service that is combined with technology. I like to look at it as a framework that is comprised of a high degree of subject matter expertise and some really, really innovative technology. That being said, we also work with organizations so that they can maximize the use of their existing technology before we make recommendations about gap filling. And at the end of the day, it's really about creating greater cohesion, breaking down silos, and creating a better culture of security. And I have a little quote in the lower left corner of this slide. And it's actually not a quote, it's a statement as it relates to the research that we do, the level of research that we do. And we're going to make an offer to you who are in the cyber diaspora. We can provide detailed intelligence reports that help leaders get more strategic insights. I've spent quite a bit of time with Gartner, and they now have a category called post-quantum cryptography readiness technology. And guess who was pushing them to develop that category? Moi. Okay. And that was the result of the work I was doing with regard to ransomware resistant post-quantum cryptography ready storage. And that's a whole nother session. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to steal the thunder from Jacob as we collaborate and pull the next round of webinars together. But it's really important to emphasize and focus on organizational culture, because if you focus solely on technology, in the top right-hand corner of every slide, you'll see there's a little Venn diagram, and technology, people, process, and culture. The people and culture piece is an area that we focus heavily on, because behavior change, creating that security culture, is what is absolutely needed today. And we do our level best to work with organizations to help them in this regard. We also want to make sure that what we deliver isn't something that we cobble together. It's fit to your needs as an organization, based on your maturity, based on your roadmap, based on your strategic plans. All right. So who are the beneficiaries of Resilience 360? I've got a couple of people here. I got to say, one of the types of folks that I think are best served by what we do are members of boards. Why is that? Because they are not operational, right? They are strategic. And if they can get the understanding of the operational capabilities in a way that addresses the host of risk that a particular organization might be subject to, it tends to make their lives a little easier. So they have better risk oversight, they have better compliance assurance, they have a better sense of the fact that the organization is strategically resilient. There's operational resilience, getting to a recovery point objective within a recovery time objective, understanding what your maximum tolerable downtime is. That's all part of resilience, more on the operational side. But strategic resilience is building that into the future. And you could be acquiring entities that will negatively impact your resilience if you don't think strategically. So we offer services where we can actually go in and do the type of due diligence and integration of acquired entities to ensure that those entities do not have dormant liability that is just going to creep up and bubble up at some point, unbeknownst to the folks who looked at the balance sheet and said, yeah, this is a keeper. You have to also have a deep understanding of what the potential risks are from a dormant data, dormant infrastructure, or other perspective, right? Data liability. CISO, it goes without saying that CISOs are beneficiaries of what we bring to the table. Enhanced threat response. Now, CrowdStrike, which is the world's premier threat response capability, had themselves some issues. And it was a vulnerability that they introduced into their SDLC process and pushed out in a way that cost billions. And there's going to be a lot of fallout from this for some time to come. Enhanced threat response, technology optimization, making sure that you make the most out of your technology, right? I've been in organizations where I've seen technology, multi-million-dollar tools underused or not used at all. Scalability and interoperability. That's also extremely important for a CISO. Chief legal officers, and I love chief legal officers. I have done a lot of advisory work. I've taught classes for federal judges. I've done a lot of CLE work as it relates to various technical issues. I co-authored 3 chapters in a 2011 treatise on e-discovery. It was edited by a U.S. District Court Judge Paul Grimm. He's a former Army Ranger, and I think we bonded there for a bit, and he brought me in on a couple of cases. And so understanding the technical landscape and the implications of the legislative landscape and your policy requirements on your infrastructure, because you, Chief Legal Officer, are one of the key arbiters of what the CISO does, right? You're one of the key arbiters of what the Chief Privacy Officer does. And the Chief Privacy Officer oftentimes is a lawyer themselves, right? So there's a lot of great opportunity, I think, for in-house chief legal officers as well as outside counsel. Chief privacy officers are extraordinary in that the main pressure impacting them is ensuring that they comply with this whole panoply of domestic US legislation while adhering to the global legislative requirements of GDPR and various other jurisdictions. Being able to respond to a data subject access request, a DASR, is one of the most pressing issues organizations have, particularly after a breach. Incident response, they also are stakeholders in the incident response capabilities, because if there is a major breach and customer data is stolen that contains non-public PII or any other information, there is a reporting requirement. And so you need to understand your data. All right. Okay, it's self-explanatory there. I'm just going to keep moving on here. This slide really talks about what we help do. It really brings it home. And one of the things that I wanted to reflect in this slide is I wanted to talk about fiduciary roles, right? We all have fiduciary roles. But if you have a C in your title, and that C is chief, right? If you have a V and a P in your title, you've got a fiduciary duty, right? And one of the phrases I love is awareness creates a duty. If you are aware of a condition that could have a material adverse impact on your organization, and you are aware of a method, a means to mitigate that risk, and you fail to do so, you have breached your duty, because a duty is an affirmative obligation, right? And so what I'm trying to do here is make you aware, right? So that you will reach out and we can have a conversation about what does this awareness of capabilities mean? How can I step out and create a heightened posture of security and a security culture for my organization? Those are the things that we help with. Fortify your operational resilience, achieve peace of mind. When I was running a SOC, I was very proud of the fact that I worked with people and they slept well at night, right? Because I made sure that they could sleep well at night. Safeguarding third-party relationships is important. Dragging those third parties along that are critical to your operation is also very critical. It will only benefit you in the end to the extent that you can create a program that they can get in line with. It furthers your ability to see into the supply chain, furthers your ability to validate the fact that your suppliers are compliant, okay? And at the end of the day, it's about shareholder value. It's about driving growth for the organization. And in the bottom left-hand corner here, this is the quote I was looking for earlier. Cybersecurity is not just about technology. It's about understanding human behavior, organizational culture, and the psychological underpinnings that drive decision-making, right? To protect an organization, we must understand both the technical and human factors. And all too often, many organizations out there forget that, right? They look at an SOW, they look at milestones, they look at deliverables, and boom, right? And for us, it doesn't end there. We make sure that our SOWs include certain other milestones as well. Whoops, I should have blocked that. I hate when that happens in the middle of a webinar. Yeah, so that was James Lynn, Global Head of Security Research at Sophos. And at this time, I think we are going to go into Q&A.
Sensational stuff, Rich. Thanks for the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and pull up some of the questions that we have from the queue. So the first is about DORA, and
Yes.
that's from Thomas, and it is, does DORA require that the data be in the EU or that the service is performed in the EU, but the data can be in the USA?
That is, so does DORA, so if you are operating, let's say I'm a large insurance company and I have a London office and I have customers in London. And forgive me if I'm butchering the question or butchering the response, but if you are operating as an entity that meets the requirements that you're in that particular, for lack of a better term, code. Standard industrial classification is a US construct, but whatever the analog is over there in the UK, or EU rather. Yes, if you are a financial institution in the EU and you have a presence in the United States, you're subject to both the United States regs as well as DORA, right? And if you're a US entity operating in the EU, you're subject to DORA. I don't know if I answered the question or not, but certainly reach out to me if I haven't, or clarify. I'll be happy to respond.
Thank you for that, Rich. The next one, and I believe you might have covered some of this, but just so we can get into some deeper specifics, how does Resilience 360 integrate with our existing cybersecurity and compliance tools, and what makes it stand out compared to other risk management solutions?
So when you think, the operative word is tools, right? And when I look at an organization's existing infrastructure, software technology, and resource investments, the first thing that we do as a part of the enterprise resilience and cyber risk team, is look at whether those existing tools are being maximized. The use of those tools are being maximized. And if they're not, then we will help the organization leverage those features and functionality that aren't being used. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a tool that you use for e-discovery, and that tool has a data classification engine. And you can take lots of unstructured data, and for the purposes of litigation, you classify the documents. That same tool, if you're not using it for records management, can be used for records management. That same tool, if you're not using it for data loss prevention categorization, can be used for data loss prevention categorization. That same tool, if it has regular expression and other AI related capabilities around finding certain types of things, that tool can be used for data privacy related initiatives. So the question was, how do we integrate with your existing tools? We start by looking at your tools, right? We also follow on with gap analyses, and it really depends on your situation. Again, it's not about we're coming in with a box of bottled solutions. We're coming in, we're understanding your organization, we're understanding your application inventory, we're understanding what your requirements are, where your pain points are, and we're understanding how then we can help amortize your existing infrastructure investment across areas that can leverage those tools. Okay.
So the next one is maybe a branch of that, and that is, how long does it typically take to see tangible results in risk reduction?
It depends on what kind of risk. There's lots of different kinds of risks in different areas. But when you say tangible risks, what's a tangible risk is a missing clause in a master services agreement that obligates your suppliers to conform to a particular obligation that your cyber liability insurance provider has imposed on you, right? How quickly can that be addressed is a matter of how quickly can we create basically a novation that allows for that clause to be included and ratified by your suppliers. That is one of the key third-party supplier immediate low-hanging fruit scenarios. Right? Other types of risk. How quickly can you reduce your ability to get visibility into your your vulnerability posture of the assets in your CMDB. CMDB is a configuration management database. Anybody who is in IT in a large organization will know what a CMDB is. It basically has every single application that you have in the enterprise. It has all of your assets listed in the enterprise. It has the versions of your software, et cetera, et cetera. If you have the ability to rapidly correlate the infrastructure that supports your critical applications, as well as the software that supports your critical applications, you can virtually in 24 hours after the implementation of certain tools, begin to understand where you need to focus. And that is an almost immediate benefit. Okay. Because the way that it works today, right? You get your vulnerability information. Now you have to parse through it and match it up with your infrastructure and your applications, et cetera. And 90% of the stuff that you get through your threat intel or your vulnerability management vendor isn't relevant to you, right? So there's an enormous amount of effort with false positive analysis, right? If you can reduce that to the 10% that's relevant, that's immediate ROI. And so there are ways to do that. And I'm excited for anyone who contacts us and asks us how that can be done.
Excellent. The next one is, which I think is one of my favorite features about Resilience 360, is how does Resilience 360 help align our risk management, legal, and IT teams to ensure seamless collaboration across these critical?
I love that question, and I'll tell you why. All right. Before the rig sank, the BP Deepwater Horizon rig sank, I won a contract with British Petroleum to do precisely that. My role was to look at how the IT department collaborated with the legal department because there was friction. And what I've seen in my experience over the years is that wherever there's friction, the function that relies on the function, such as legal relies on IT, wherever there's friction, the function that needs will go out and get something, right? Whether it's a technology they think they need, which may just die on the vine because it's now unsupported because it wasn't part of the budget, it wasn't part of the roadmap, it wasn't part of the plan. So there's a heightened level of integration and awareness and service delivery that we focus on to address some of the friction points between functions. And IT and legal, I've seen so much over the years in terms of that type of friction creating risk, because now you have technologies that may be unsupported at some point. Now you have technologies that don't meet certain requirements from the organization's IT security perspective, right? Now you don't have the requisite oversight of the vendor security posture. So there's so much risk that can be ameliorated by leveraging our resources to facilitate the level of awareness and understanding. Again, I point to the quote from the prior slide, the psychological and behavioral component of creating synergy between functions is something that we can help facilitate, particularly when there's a lot of organizational change.
Great. We have another question here from John, and that is, we are currently researching AI model concepts and components for an AI bill of material. There are evolving regulations around this. How does Resilience 360's methods address this?
That's actually a great question. There's a lot of research that the Resilience Practice Group has done with regard to AI-related legislation. We have tons and tons of info on how organizations can get ahead of existing, comply with existing, and get ahead of pending regulations that will require them to report on how defensible their methods are, on eliminating bias, on ensuring that they can, when the auditors come in and ask certain questions, they can respond accordingly. This was our training set. These were the models that we used. This is the validation methodology that we did. So an AI bill of material, just for those of who may not know much about the concept of bills of material, is a detailed AI platform / code analysis that allows you to identify and archive artifacts that go into an AI model. The concept derived from or evolved from software bill of materials, which the 2021 Biden executive order on strengthening the nation's cybersecurity mandated certain sectors create SBOM, software bill of materials, to more rapidly get a sense of what's in it, right? Because we've seen a lot of scenarios where certain chips or certain software coming from overseas or from certain nation states, non-compliant, had malicious code, et cetera, et cetera. So to combat that, the concept of bills of material have taken off. You have cryptographic bills of material, and that aligns very well with NIST's post-quantum cryptography readiness program. And if anybody wants to learn about that, I think there's a great time. This is a great time to have that discussion, not now, but some other time. But we have a great deal of depth and expertise, and we've got partners who are innovators in that space that work very closely with government agencies.
Fantastic. And the final question that we have here for the day is, how does Resilience 360 ensure that our incident response plans are not only compliant, but also actionable and ready to be deployed in the event of a crisis? And how do we manage those sorts of situations?
That's fantastic. So when we talk about incident response compliance, so I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you have a cyber incident response team, right? And let's say you have a team that does physical security and natural disasters, right? And let's say you have another team, they're not in the cyber response, but they're more on just operational related activities, IT activities. Each of those groups will leverage different industry standard frameworks. Some might use NIST, some might use CIS framework, MITRE framework. Another team might use a framework that's really that's a FEMA type framework in terms of classifying incidents. And so you have different ways of classifying things. And what we do at Resilience 360 is we help organizations harmonize the classification methodology so you're speaking the same language, right? Someone might classify something as severe versus high. And in their world, a severe is a high, but in the normalized world of what's what, to be able to act appropriately as an organization, you need to be able to harmonize different levels of or different classifications of risk across different types of groups. Because keep in mind, you can have a non-cyber incident that started as a IT incident, right? That's not cyber. It's just an IT incident. Hey, I can't do this, I can't do that, or something's broken or whatever, something's offline, right? Turns out root cause, or it may have created an opportunity for a threat actor to get into the system and do something. And the same thing with natural disasters. We've seen it repeatedly where something will occur, threat actors will not hesitate to take advantage of a crisis. And we can definitely help with reducing risk posture, making sure that your playbooks are in places that you can access if your infrastructure is down. And the best thing to be able to do is to have all of your playbooks in a vault. And when a crisis occurs, whatever that is, of a particular severity level, you can activate that vault. And it will automatically bring in all of the various stakeholders that need to be brought in to deal, to respond, and to recover.
Excellent. Thank you, Rich, for the presentation. We're coming up on the top of the hour. So for those of you who are wondering, what's the next step? How can you action on this and start to achieve some results within your organization? We do offer what's called a business intelligence report for qualified organizations. Rich, I'm going to let you share some final information on that and just what should people do now that they've got this information and they're ready to take the next step.
This should have my contact information and email, but you'll be able to get it you'll be able to reach out and get it. I apologize for that oversight there. But the intelligence report is designed it's a bespoke report. If you are an organization, let's say you're a pharmaceutical company, and you're a pharmaceutical company that is developing vaccines, to the extent there are scenarios, there are threats that impact your particular vertical, to the extent there are opportunities in terms of growth opportunities, whether it's from an acquisition perspective or getting acquired perspective, We survey the market to look at what the market looks like. We look at the competition, we look at any strategic growth opportunities, we look at the threat landscape, we look at the regulatory landscape. We look at all of the things that are important to different stakeholders within the organization using publicly available information, I might add. We can do a much better job if we conduct an interview and under NDA, whatever, we can do a much better research job of compiling that information. But it's a report that has garnered some attention. I've actually presented unsolicited intelligence reports to companies in the past and one business because they saw that we knew their business. And it's refreshing, at least I was told that, to get this kind of information. So let us know how we can help you. We're happy to connect with you, talk with you, give you a complimentary report, and take it from there.
Thank you very much, Rich, and thank you everybody for attending. We're grateful to have you here at Resilience 360's webinar. We will be in contact and share more information and details which you can use to stay informed, educated, and if you're interested to take the next steps. So have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you all soon.